We're here at Sundance with Jake Paltrow, whose film Young Ones premiered here this week at the Sundance Film Festival. And thanks for talking to the playlist.
Sure, of course.
Congratulations. I think this is a really ambitious, totally unique film. And it's just a completely unique story hatched from your inventive mind. So I've been calling it a futuristic Western, which I think people are calling it. So, but how do you describe it to people when you're doing your pitch?
That's a good start. I guess I was saying for a while that it was just a Western. But a futuristic Western is because it didn't. I don't think I initially set out to really make a Western. I think initially, in my mind, it felt more like a sci-fi movie. Mm-hmm. Even though it was really a chamber piece between this family and these characters, I always thought of it as a chamber piece, a science fiction sort of chamber piece. And then as we started putting it together and going to the environment and figuring out the locations where it very quickly presented itself as a Western. And then, and I guess maybe in general, that's sort of my approach with these movies, with actors and other things, is I sort of like to bring the movie to the thing, And so I think this became more of a Western as I prepared to make it.
Well, there were so many of the choices that you made in there that were like the long fades and the dramatic, the music, and it was really kind of a John Williams-esque score. Right. It just felt kind of old-fashioned, but in a good way. But then had these futuristic touches, which was really interesting. And so, those all conscious choices that you were making?
Yeah, those were things I thought about. I think even those dissolves were even written into the script. I really like that in movies when you have that sort of long, you see one image drift away.
Yeah.
Like a 10-second dissolve.
Yeah, they were long, yeah.
And you have some of them really, and as long as there's enough going on either side of them, trying to, I always like that people are still talking as the dissolve starts. That's something I always loved.
Huh.
There's a great one. There was a great one in Full Metal Jacket, when, I don't know. There's a great one in Full Metal Jacket where it's early on. It's in this. No, I'm sorry. It's in the second act. And I think the guy says, my present duty is keep me where I belong, in the rear with the gear, and he's always saying it as the dissolve is sort of happening. So that's sort of where it's something like that.
Because so many movies now are just like frenetic cut, action, and I just thought I liked that it felt kind of, I don't know, refreshing in a way. So tell us how it got started. Like, where did this inspiration from the story come from, and was it brought on? I was seeing how I've just heard that California just declared a drought emergency.
It's a big story 2 days ago.
Yeah, huge story. So, where did this come from in your brain?
Well, it started with those kinds of stories. Now, most of those stories were outside of our country when I started writing this. In 2008, the two big stories that started my sort of interest in putting a movie in a landscape like this was, the first one was in Yemen. They were talking about moving the capital because the water was going to run out in 10 years.
Wow.
And the other was a story about this town in Chile that they called the driest town in the world. And people had stayed behind, and they were trucking water in to the town. And they were asking them sort of why they stayed. They all stayed for these really unusual personal reasons that I was just sort of fascinated by.
Was it tied to the land, or what were their reasons?
Most of the reasons were really tied to that it's going to change. It's going to get better. I'd love if there was like a follow-up story now to see like if anything was happening.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
And then there were stories that were sort of starting, and as I wrote it and was trying to get it made, a lot of those stories were starting to happen here. It was 2 years ago, it was in Texas, and last year it was in Texas a lot, and this year it's California. The last couple of years it's been California, but this year it feels like the first time, the culmination of the last few years. I mean, the idea that they're going to let 200,000 acres in Central California go fallow this year because there's no water to irrigate it.
Really?
It's pretty scary.
Yeah.
You get a couple more years of that, I don't know what that spells.
Yeah. And with all the fires that are happening, in Colorado and in Arizona or all those different places, yeah, it's pretty scary.
So, ours is obviously not a reality
right.
sort of movie. It's very storybook in a lot of ways. But it has these elements of things that are, if not plausible, possible, or vice versa.
So then was it just fun to stick in the futuristic kind of things, like with the simulate, and maybe you could tell the audience about the simulate?
Yeah, well that was something, I've sort of always been sort of interested in robotics, and initially I wanted to use this real robot called Big Dog that was made by this company, Boston Dynamics, and I sort of reached out to them, and I got to spend a little bit of time with them, actually get to spend a little time with Big Dog. And so robotics is just something that I'm interested in, and for this movie, most movies, or not most, but a lot of movies when they deal with robotics, they often are very interested in, does the machine have a soul, sort of approach. And that was something I'm not very interested in, but I'm very interested in what the characters sort of imbue the machine sort of with. And in this film, you know, the sense of blame, and that sort of blame for this central event in the film, I think is really, really interesting. And you see that a bit in manufacturing and industry now, the idea of machines taking away jobs. And when you take the sort of sentient element out of the machinery, which, you know, a lot of these science fiction movies make sort of the central conceit or the central point of dealing with robotics, in some ways it even becomes more human because it's really just about what we feel about.
Yeah, I mean, the whole audience is like, oh, well, you know, at certain points. We don't want to see it get beaten up, even though it's a machine. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
But in ours, it's sort of, you know, is it feeling any sort of pain? Or what are, you know, what are the feelings? What does that even mean?
Right.
Our picture.
So you've been working on this movie for many moons. It sounds like you just
5
mentioned
years.
2008. So yeah, tell us about
that's when it started, but yeah,
tell us about the journey. Why did it take so long? What?
It's very hard to get money, you know, to make these movies, and it takes a long time. And you get like, and it takes a long time to get actors to read them, and so you know, I mean, I think we finally started having after like 2.5 years, 2 years. About 2 years to start to get some actors involved in the picture. We were sort of signed on.
Who came on first?
Elle was the first.
Uh-huh.
I think it was Elle, and then it was Nicholas. Well, there was some different. No, Elle was the first. Then there was a different actor for a little bit who was going to play the father.
Uh-huh.
And then he fell out right before we were going to do it, and then that's when I got Michael. Really,
I mean, who's
the greatest.
Right. I mean, I couldn't imagine that movie without him in it. So.
Me neither.
Yeah.
No, that's one of those. You know, and that's the other thing. You know, not that I totally believe in the things are, you know, meant to be or the reason behind everything, but sometimes there is something really interesting about just letting it be the way it's going to be. And in this case, obviously, we got lucky.
Right.
And we ended up with this incredible cast.
Yeah.
So Mike was the last one. So I think it was Elle, Nicholas, and Cody. Maybe it went in that order.
I mean, Cody McPhee has been doing amazing work over the last few years. He's really a standout, and so, I mean, he's really great in this film. Can you talk about what he's like to work with and how he's
just such a gifted kid.
Yeah, just naturally, or does it?
Yes. He has that gene, you know. It's like just watching somebody where none of it's that hard for him. You know, if you even just in playful conversation, if he slips into an accent or one of those sorts of things, like it's perfect. You know, like we shot in South Africa. You know, he'll do a perfect South African accent. You know, he was just in Scotland finishing this movie that he's doing with Michael Fassbender. It's like everything he does is just sort of perfect. It's just one of these really gifted.
How old is he now?
17.
17. When you shot, he was 15-ish or 16?
He was 16 when we shot. I think when he first auditioned, he was just turned 15 maybe. And I was very worried. So the movie fell apart. We were going to shoot it in Spain at one point, and about 3 weeks before we were going to start, it stopped. Now it was very hard. And when we got it reconstituted, and we were going to go to South Africa, I was very worried that Cody was going to be too old.
Right.
But he wasn't.
Yeah.
We sort of talked through it again. It's just so good to do.
So tell me about filming. You filmed in South Africa. It feels like the American West. Why did you have to go so far? And then what were the challenges of shooting in South Africa?
Well, number one, it was the best location sort of for the movie. You know, though it takes place in an unspecified place, it you know, it's really sort of the look that I always liked was sort of the eastern plains of Colorado. So you're coming out of those mountains into the flats, and it really had that look. It had that sort of Dust Bowl look. If all of that farmland just went totally infertile and suffered a drought, you know, it had that same sort of rise, you know, toward the mountains.
And was there nothing you could find here that, or was this too expensive?
Then there are other elements. Then there's just a production element.
Right.
And so it's less expensive, and we have a great South African producer, and there's an incentive, and so it just became a place that was going to be sort of ideal to make it.
And you said the other night though that it got up to 115 degrees.
The first 2 days we shot was 115 degrees. That the opening shootout with Mike and these water bandits. It was, I mean, and the whole experience was unbelievably challenging. And it really had a sort of Fitzcarraldo feeling to it when you were out there. It was like just us. We brought everything with us. It was a long trip to get out of there. And so when something went wrong, like when the lights broke, like that was it. And there were nights where it happened twice. The lights blew. Everything, we were sitting in pitch black in the desert at that house, which had no electricity. It was just movie lights.
Right.
And it's sort of like everybody, flashlights go on, and that's it. We're ready to go home. Which means you have to take those lights, drive them almost a day to Cape Town, switch them out a day back. So it's just so challenging, and the heat obviously just brings to a whole other element to it.
Yeah. You felt the heat, which is crucial for the movie. I mean, that helped the movie for sure. So you created a whole world, kind of. So you created the country, this western element. But then, how did you do this, like the cityscapes? Was that just all kind of CG, or was that?
Yeah, because that was
okay.
we shot. We went to Cape Town, so that city sort of. But then we don't want it to look like Cape Town. We wanted to
right.
So then we added a lot of those buildings. We sort of added, and. There are these elements in the film, like the supersonic passenger jet that sort of flies above, that was never totally explained. We're just trying to sort of thread this thing through the movie that makes you feel like there is this world going on outside, that the life that we're living,
right.
the technology that we have, has expanded outside of the place where the movie's sort of taking place. And you see a little bit of it when he crosses the border, the girls flip.
I loved her phone. That was so cool.
Yeah.
Did you come up with that?
I just came up with it. I just had a good idea for it, and then we sort of built the props guys sort of built we literally made it from like a film. And then digitally moved the screen. The idea we had is little.
I had phone envy. That was
yeah. No, I mean that was and I always loved that as a kid. I mean, we would see like Back to the Future or something, and you'd say the hoverboards. And we said, forever we said the hoverboard exists. The hoverboard really exists, So where we have to try to, and that was good. I mean, we're still here, friends too.
So there's all those futuristic touches like we talked about, like the simulant and the phone and the medical advances with the mother, kind of keeping the mother alive.
Exactly.
So she's supposed to like she's supposed to be like amputee, yeah?
So she's an amputee, but she's also quadriplegic, is the idea.
Yeah.
So the technology that lets her, so she lives in this mobile community where she essentially lives like a marionette. And it was sort of based on, remember those toys where you would have like a ballerina or something, you press the bottom and she'd fall over, then you let it go and it would snap up.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that sort of plugged into her nervous system is a series of electrodes, and she's basically being electrocuted, which creates that same kind of tension that the strings in the marionette is in fact electricity running through her muscles. And so it creates a tension that actually stands her up. And then there's a pneumatic air system, little puffs of air that are making all of her little movements. So that was sort of the thinking behind how to make that work.
Right.
I mean, it's obviously completely fictional, but it seemed interesting.
And then when you pull the plug,
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So there's that side. I mean, I just like the dichotomy between that and then Michael Shannon listening to like 1950s, 1960s music.
Yes.
What was your thinking there? Like that was.
So there is, everything is now all the delivery
and the shortwave radio or whatever.
All the sort of like entertainment delivery systems are now basically digital everywhere. So, and to me, digital has a control element to it. It's all, you can stop it, you can change it, you can put key codes and locks and all that stuff on anything digital. Whereas when it was analog and airwaves, you can't stop it. You always think of like Voice of America and all these things we would do in the communist era, the Cold War, to sort of get people, democratic ideas and stuff. And now the idea, because obviously our movie is taking these ideas of, if you have a defiant state government, they're not going to have sanctions enacted sort of against them by the federal government. That's what's happening in the state where our movie sort of takes place. So they've cut off the internet and television, satellite television. So all those things are going to be just with a flip of a button because it's all digital now.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. Like the airways are saved now for emergency broadcast system.
Right.
In the next however many years, there's truly going to be no more analog television signal.
Right.
So the idea is just running on these what are now the 10-meter radio systems, how people are communicating and getting their entertainment. And then the idea for sort of that country music from that era and the sort of the radio shows is that it's all, by the time the movie takes place, it's all public domain. So it's stuff that you don't necessarily need the rights to. And and obviously it brings a texture to it, and it brings a sort of feeling to it. It makes it, you know, it's that sort of like last picture show sort of feeling within this science fiction movie. But there's a logic to it, and so I like both. I like the emotional nature of the songs themselves, and then I like how they got there. The idea that it's sort of.
Did you have a sense of what year it was in your head? Did you?
I mean, I think if we were gonna, because it's as much in the future to me as it is an alternate reality. So, but if we were gonna put it, I mean, it's a. There's one giveaway because Mike has a G-Shock watch, and we were playing with the date. We said, how high will this go? And it stops at a certain number. So that, I guess, would be the year, but it's not quite as far as I guess I thought it would be.
It's a little
We're also
Easter
sort of
egg.
hamstrung a little bit by the automobiles that we could use. You know, we tried to make that sort of like the Cuba 1959 idea that things just stop one day.
Right.
We're just going to have these sort of, so we picked sort of a mid-90s aesthetic for that. So that's a bit in the, that's certainly in the cars, it's a bit in the clothing. So we, and you see, like being in South Africa and going with whatever resources we have, you know, I sort of like took the movie
Right.
to it, you
Cool.
know. Trying to make it work with what we have.
So I picked up, you know, with the John Williams score, there's kind of a Spielberg feel to the movie in a lot of ways, and I just wanted to ask you about your influences and who you consider to be your influences.
Well, there's definitely the Spielberg influence, I think, especially sort of.
You have a connection. You have a close connection with him, yeah.
That's probably the biggest one. I mean, visually, we actually didn't look really at any movies to think of how we find the look. That was something that Giles, Nutchin's my cinematographer, and I. The Silent Light, which was a movie that I had really liked, about Mennonites in Mexico, was really the only one I remember we ever thought, oh, I really love the way this movie looks. You know, the lensing in that movie was. But beyond that, there were really no movies that we. The writing of it, there were lots of things in it, and there was also some anime as well. There were. The Bresson Oazar Balthazar was a movie that I've always really liked, and that was a donkey, and ours sort of has the robot has a bit of that sort of taken from that movie. The S.E. Hinton books were really probably the biggest sort of inspiration, and those movies as well. The adaptations, the Coppola adaptations of The Outsiders, big sort of influence on the picture. Just the way the kids sort of are, that they sort of take place in a very storybook environment. That was something I was really interested in. And then there were ones like His and Her Circumstances, which is an anime by the guy who did Neon Genesis Evangelion, was one that I really loved. There's a lot of like Jerome and Ears, The Girl Across the Border, that has that sort of, you know, kids that have, you know, suffered or have, you know, been forced to kill people, or you know, there's like, or have a sort of, you know, PTSD from the lives that they're living. You know, meeting kids with that sort of stuff, but done in an unusual way. I mean, I've always really liked anime.
That's interesting. It's not a natural, like, you know, connection with a Western.
I know. I mean, but those are the ones, you know, I like the emotional elements of those. I like it when, you know, something like in Neon Genesis Evangelion, when the robots stop fighting, you know, you're dealing with these kids that are really suffering these sort of, you know, internal battles and stuff. And the kids in our movie are all of them, especially you know, Mary and Jerome, Alan Nick's characters. So
I also felt like the chapter things were Tarantino kind of homage to.
That's not intentional, but the idea of the chapter headings, I think, comes more probably from S.E. Hinton making it as if it were an adaptation of, like, if she had done a science fiction sort of story. This is maybe what it would sort of be like. That it necessarily would, but that's sort of my thinking. So I like the idea of treating it a little bit like an adaptation, that you would that each of these three characters sort of get their section. And making it very clear. And also it makes it a little bit more storybook, which I like. It made it more movie-ish.
Yeah. I liked all the different touches. That's what I thought was, you know, paid a lot of attention to detail. It was nice. So just closing up here, you were at Sundance in 1996 with a short, and then 2007 with your last feature. So what's it like being back here this week?
Pretty great.
Yeah.
You know, there's something about this place that, you know, I mean, I feel like, you know, filmmakers in general, you know, it's even though it's such a collaborative thing, there is something very lonely about being a director, and I feel like coming to Sundance is like the one club that directors who I think for the most part are quite individualistic would want to sort of be a part
It's a
of
community,
it.
yeah.
And I find myself here. I have some other friends who have some pictures here, and I saw them at the directors brunch, and there's something just really nice about that.
Yeah.
And so I'm staying for the whole thing so I can see some movies.
Great.
Our stuff is sort of winding down now.
Have you seen anything yet?
No, nothing yet. But now, now it's Monday, so Monday I'm staying till Saturday. So now starting tomorrow, so hopefully start.
We'll talk. I'll tell you what I've liked.
Yeah.
so far.
Please do. Please tell me, because that'd be great.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to the playlist.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.